You, you told that some companies they became mobile and they put the R&D researchers away from the borders to other countries. Where? To what countries?
Well,
Where do they outsource them?
it's not governments that are outsourcing their researchers. The thing is that you have a situation whereby multinational companies are establishing research centres abroad. One of the speakers this morning mentioned the situation in Switzerland. You have Google, which has set up a research centre in Switzerland. They're also in India. You have a very big information technology industry, a computer software industry, but most of the patents that are being applied for are being applied for by multinational companies, not by Indian-owned companies. So one of the ways in which researchers are moving around the world is because they are employed by these multinational companies. They don't always hire researchers from the country in which they are established. You have multinational companies in electronics, for example, in Malaysia. But for the moment, the feeling is that Malaysia cannot supply the skilled researchers that these companies need. So
they put the research center in India, for example.
yes, and but over time, it's also in the country's best interest when the company can help to contribute. For example, we were talking about in the science report, from memory, it was the case of Cambodia, and we were saying that the government could, one of the conclusions of the report was that the government could invite multinational companies to help train local people so that they have the skills that the company needs so that it can employ local people. And in Malaysia, there is also a consortium of multinational companies that are strong in the electronics field, and they have voluntarily banded together to try and create a more favorable environment for research in Malaysia.
And do they put such research centers in Russia, for example, in Novosibirsk, where there is a very famous mathematical students?
I don't know about Novosibirsk. There is the Skolkovo city that is being developed, that has strong government support. A lot of big companies have set up business there. So that is an example I know about in the Russian Federation.
Well, Skolkovo is very famous in Russia. We know everything about Skolkovo, etc., etc. But the Skolkovo Center, is it famous? Is it considered an important center abroad, like in the United States or in Germany? Do they think high about the Skolkovo Center?
Well, people vote with their feet. So if companies have set up business in Skolkovo, it's because they think it is a viable proposition. As long as the business climate is favorable, it's easy for them to get visas for their staff.
And is it favorable?
And is it?
Is it favorable?
Well, time will tell, but the best way to find out whether it is a favorable environment is whether these companies decide to stay or not.
And if we compare Skolkovo to R&D centers in India or in China, with a lot of them, can we compare them from comparative advantages, etc., etc.?
Well, China has a policy of, for example, China concluded an agreement with the European Union for the installation of Airbus, the aircraft manufacturer. And in the negotiations, as I understand it, the Chinese asked for transfer of technology to be part of the negotiations. Now, China, in December 2014, its first jet aircraft was certified by the National Aviation Service.
You mean civil jet?
Civil aircraft, yes, yes. So this is a big step forward for China. So I would say there are potentially a lot of advantages from the growing mobility of scientists, but it depends also on the policies in place in the country. Whether, for example, in some countries in Asia, you have exports of computer parts, but the computer parts are assembled in Asian countries, but there is no research and development. And this gives a false impression. When you look at the high-tech trade statistics, it looks as if a developing country in Asia is exporting a lot of...
Right? It's ASEAN countries where everyone assembles computer parts, spare parts, and they
Where?
don't have ASEAN.
ASEAN countries, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations.
ASEAN, yes. So,
Well, yes, that is the case in a lot of Asian countries. Singapore is developing endogenous innovation now. They set up in about 2004 a centre called Biopolis, if my memory serves me well, and then in 2008 one for ICTs. And these clusters of research centres were designed to help build endogenous innovation. They brought researchers from abroad to train people locally. And the example I gave this morning of this scheme with the venture capital and the government to guide, support startups which they identify which have potential for disruptive innovation. In other words, the potential to create new markets.
You also spoke about the green energy, the development of green energy, and there was an assumption that the development of green energy will continue until there are big, huge prices on oil, on gas, and other traditional forms of energy. Now we have a huge drop of these prices, and can we have an assumption that now the research and development on green energy will become low or even stop?
Well, it's only an opinion, but I think that it's a process that is going to continue because there are a growing number of countries that are worried about energy security and also have made international commitments. There was the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in Paris last year, and a lot of countries made commitments to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. We also have the Sustainable Development Goals that were adopted by the United Nations last September, and clean energy is one of the main goals.
Well,
countries now they're going to be expected to measure their progress towards these targets, and they won't be able to do it without clean energy technologies and greater energy efficiency.
Well, as I understand, that clean energy and green energy are not the same. For example, China transforms its industry from coal to gas. Gas is clean energy also.
Yes, but it's not renewable.
But it's not renewable, it's not a green energy.
And nuclear energy it uses uranium, which is a finite resource, so it's not renewable. And we say it's clean because it doesn't emit greenhouse gases, but the water that is used to cool the rods is then released into the river nearby, and this creates a lot of ecological damage. So it's not an ideal solution either.
Okay, and the last question, you told that 10 countries accumulate about 90% of all PhD students. And
in science and engineering.
In science and engineering, yes. And as I saw from the graphic, Russia wasn't among these 10.
No.
And if you spoke about the Russian PhD and Russian social and engineering sphere, why we are not in the first 10?
Well, you'd have to ask the government that. I don't have the answer.
Your position.
Well,
your opinion.
For there to be a lot of PhD students, there has to be an active policy in place to make students feel welcome. So Malaysia, for example, in its policy documents, it has fixed a target of attracting 200,000 foreign students by 2020. And between 2007 and 2012, the number doubled to more than 56,000 in Malaysia. And now they figure among the top 10 countries that are hosting foreign PhD students. And we have a graphic in the report which shows that you would think that most of the students coming to Malaysia would be from ASEAN countries. Well, in fact, they're coming from all around the world. There are a lot coming from Iran, there are a lot coming from Nigeria, from the Arab world, etc. So there is an enormous potential, and the UNESCO science report postulates that one of the ingredients in a successful policy is this cross-fertilization of ideas, talent. I mean, you just need to look at the USA, which is it's responsible for about 28% of global research expenditure, and it hosts an enormous number of foreign PhD students.
And how does it come? The Chinese overcome the United States on publications, on financing, currency development, and etc.?
Well, China has 4 times the population of the USA, approximately. So, although China has overtaken the USA for the number of researchers, it still has a much smaller researcher density than the USA, because the population is much bigger. Now China, for research expenditure, publications and researchers, is slightly better represented than its population. It is boxing slightly above its weight. China represents about 19.3% of the global population, but it has about 19.6, 19.7% of research expenditure, researchers and publications. I'm going from memory, so you need to check the figures.
Okay, it's approximate figures.
Yeah.
But we saw the graphs, and the United States was declining in expenditures, in everything, and China was rising.
Well, this was a graphic showing the world shares. So it's logical that if China increases, the world share of other countries will decline. And as it is such a populous country, 1 in 5 human beings is Chinese, whenever China progresses rapidly, it automatically has an effect on world shares.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, hope that was clear.
Yes.